My husband and I both work. I make almost 4 times what he does because he recently switched careers and started over. I fully supported his decision. I grew up in a third world country with cheap labor, so my mom hired and managed the help and ran the house. Naturally, I'm not super inclined to do home chores I didn't grow up doing, like cooking and cleaning, so I hired, pay, and manage a nanny to care for the kids while I'm at work and make us dinner on weekdays, a cleaning lady to clean the whole house and do laundry every 2 weeks, and DoorDash on weekends out of my own salary. We consider all money ours. I'm just pointing out that I work extra to cover all those things. Since I don't do them myself, therefore I am not burdening anyone else. Of note, his mom never outsourced anything and did all those things herself. So there's definitely a cultural element. My husband does more of the physical labor around the house. Random gardening, fixing things, taking out the garbage, etc. He does organize things when they get messy, which I'm much more relaxed about because we have 2 under 2. So things get messy again as soon as you tidy up. I do all the invisible load stuff, make and ensure we keep appointments, buy stock everything everyone needs, including groceries every week, plan schedules and classes and trips, etc. I basically keep the house running like my mom did when I was growing up. Like I said, we have 2 young kids. I take care of them when I get home from work while the nanny cooks. Husband and I each do 1 bedtime. On weekends, we each do 1 wake-up. So we try to split it pretty evenly. Once the kids go to bed, we both have a couple of hours to unwind. I work at the hospital. Husband works from home and has a ton of downtime during the workday. Hours when he works out, does whatever he wants, and does things around the house. Is what I'm doing my fair share for the family? Husband sometimes thinks I should do more because what I do can easily be done sitting on the couch. He basically hates it when I sit down, use my phone, or have the TV on, even if I'm holding/feeding the baby, watching our toddler, making calls, or setting up appointments, writing schedules, ordering groceries, etc. He wants me up and at it, visibly doing stuff around the house. He does not wish me to hire more help. He wants me to do it. In my opinion, the fact that the things I do can be done while sitting down does not make them any less crucial. Not to mention, he's not very good at doing them himself. For example, we've been seeing a marriage counselor for our issues that I naturally scheduled and paid for. I told him that since he thinks making appointments is so easy, he could handle booking the counselor. Once it became his job, it never got done. And he straight up said to me, "Never mind, we don't need a counselor. Our marriage is fine." What do you think? I believe we both do things for the house and family that play to each of our individual strengths and what we grew up learning to do. Is our arrangement fair, or should I step up and do more in my limited time? To add, 1. I am not incapable of doing house chores, and I do contribute to getting them done myself. I tidy up the living spaces, I do dishes if I see them sitting in the sink, I wash and sterilize the baby bottles, I set and/or clear the table and whatever else on the day-to-day. When the nanny is on vacation, I do all of it myself. I simply never learned to cook dinner or clean a big house. I'm sure I can read a recipe and put ingredients in a pot. I can iron a shirt and do laundry. I can learn to clean a house. It's not weaponized incompetence. It's just not my forte or something I wish to use my time on if I can spend it with my kids, which is worth way more to me, or simply resting and recharging after working a very demanding job as a doctor. 2. I did not grow up rich most of my life. My husband did. I was a good middle class until finances changed, and I was actually poor for a good 20 years. I went to medical school on a full scholarship and did it with no books of my own, either borrowed or downloaded for free, no computer, no internet, etc. We still had help at home because we took on a lady who would work for us in return for housing/food/other necessities. We love her and consider her part of our family. I worked my butt off to come this far and be able to provide for my family. So spare me with the, "You're insufferable and rich." That's why the disclaimer is there. 3. My husband works from home at a desk, so he sits down for that. But on his free time, he's always going around doing things around the house on his feet. We do outsource gardening and have a handyman. We don't just pay for the things I don't want to do. But he still finds things to do/fix/clean around the house. According to him, there's always things to do, and that's what he wants me to help with. 4. I only mentioned that I make more money to point out that one. I'm carrying my weight financially, and 2. I'm specifically paying for those chores I don't want to take on myself, instead of dumping the responsibility on my husband to work more to pay for it. If I did not clarify that I'm making that money, you would come after me for being a gold digger and making my husband pay staff so I don't do anything. Again, it happened on another post. Now for an update. 5. My husband was in a different field that could easily make him almost as much as I do. He decided he was unhappy and wanted to start over doing something different. I fully supported him. He went back to school with a crazy tuition, as it was Ivy League, and took on this entry-level position. So he chose to make less money to follow his dream. I have no problem with this at all. I don't want him to be unhappy just to make money. But I believe it is a privilege that he can afford to follow that dream and let me carry the financial burden. My job is already my dream, so I'm happy. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. I'm 64 years old and ready to retire, but I tell my kids, who have high-powered jobs and work very hard, to take a portion of their income and spend it on something that can make their lives easier at home. Have someone cut the grass and have someone clean the house twice a month, etc. They work so hard, and when you have to work late and spend your days off working around the house, life can get monotonous. I never felt that way when we were younger, but circumstances were different and we didn't have as much income. Life is so short, and the kids are little for such a short time. If you can afford it, take something off your plate with a reputable person or company and use that time to enjoy and relax. Comment 2. Not the idiot, not the a-hole. Paying for help is a perfectly valid way to handle this. That said, I grew up in a similar culture where hiring help was considered a societal responsibility. If you have the money, you should create jobs for those less fortunate. I think the idea that you need to be seen doing physical labor is beyond ridiculous. I'm sure you could learn to do all these things, but it is a waste of your time. Your time and energy are better spent at work, and you would still have to do all that invisible stuff even if you were sweeping and scrubbing. Why does he want a burnt-out, exhausted spouse? It's just stupid. Now, for the update. Thanks for all your comments on my last post. 2 weeks ago, things took a turn I didn't see coming. My husband and I had another argument about household chores. He was frustrated that I wasn't doing more physical tasks around the house. I tried to explain again that I handle a lot of the mental load and that my job is demanding. But he wasn't having it. He said he felt like he was doing everything physical and that I was just sitting around. It got heated and he ended up storming out of the house. The next day, he came back with a proposition. He suggested we switch roles for a week. He would handle all the mental load tasks, and I would take on the physical chores. I was hesitant, but I agreed, thinking it might help him understand how much I actually do. The first few days were a disaster. I was overwhelmed with the physical chores. I had to cook dinner, clean the house, do the laundry, and take care of the kids without the nanny's help. I was exhausted. Meanwhile, my husband struggled with the mental load. He missed a couple of appointments, forgot to order groceries, and our schedules were a mess. It was clear that we both underestimated each other's contributions. By the end of the week, we were both frustrated and exhausted. We sat down to talk, and it was one of the most honest conversations we've had in a long time. We both admitted that we had taken each other's work for granted. He apologized for not recognizing the importance of the mental load, and I apologized for not appreciating his physical efforts more. But then things escalated. My husband suggested that we should cut back on the help we hire and do more ourselves. He felt that it would bring us closer as a family and teach our kids the value of hard work. I was torn. On one hand, I understood his point. On the other hand, I knew how demanding my job was and how much I relied on the help to keep things running smoothly. We decided to try it his way for a month. We let the nanny and cleaning lady go, and I took on more of the household chores. It was tough. I was constantly tired, and I felt like I was failing at both my job and my responsibilities at home. My husband was also struggling to keep up with his work and the additional chores. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I broke down. I told my husband that I couldn't keep up with everything. I felt like I was drowning. He was sympathetic, but he still believed that we could make it work if we just tried harder. Then something unexpected happened. My husband got a call from his old employer, offering him a high-paying job in his previous field. It was a tempting offer, but it would mean giving up his dream job. He was torn, and so was I. On one hand, the extra income would allow us to hire help again and relieve some of the pressure. On the other hand, I didn't want him to be unhappy in a job he didn't love. We spent days discussing it. My husband was leaning towards taking the job, but I could see how much it pained him to give up his dream. I didn't want him to resent me for it. I suggested that we could find a compromise. Maybe he could take the job temporarily, just until we got back on our feet, and then go back to his dream job once things were more stable. He agreed to think about it, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to give up his dream, but he also didn't want to see me struggling. It was a tough decision, and I didn't know what the right answer was. In the meantime, I tried to find ways to make things easier. I started meal prepping on weekends to save time during the week. I also tried to involve the kids in the chores, turning it into a fun activity for them. It helped a little, but I was still exhausted. One evening, while I was folding laundry, my husband came up to me and said he had made a decision. He was going to take the job. He said he couldn't stand seeing me so stressed and that he would rather be unhappy in his job than see me unhappy at home. I was touched by his sacrifice, but I also felt guilty. I didn't want him to give up his dream for me. We decided to give it a try and see how it went. My husband started his new job and we hired the nanny and cleaning lady back. It was a relief to have the help again, but I could see the toll it was taking on my husband. He was working long hours and coming home exhausted. I tried to support him as much as I could, but I knew it wasn't enough. One night, as we were lying in bed, my husband opened up to me. He said he missed his old job and that he felt like he was losing a part of himself. It broke my heart to hear him say that. I realized that we needed to find a better solution, one that didn't involve either of us sacrificing our happiness. We decided to sit down and reevaluate our priorities. We talked about what was most important to us and how we could find a balance that worked for both of us. We realized that we needed to communicate better and support each other more. We also decided to look into other options, like hiring part-time help or finding ways to streamline our chores. It wasn't an easy process, but we were determined to make it work. We knew that we both had to make compromises and that it would take time to find the right balance. But we were committed to each other and to our family, and we were willing to put in the effort to make it work. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for calling out my dad for choosing my half-brother's graduation over mine? So I'm 18 years old and I have a half-brother who is the same age as me. We'll call him Cameron. Our dad got 2 women pregnant around the same time. I'm older by 6 months. My dad chose Cameron's mom over mine, and they're married now. Cameron is his parents' only child. Anyway, so I've always felt like I was just a backup son for my dad. I know he does love me, but not as much as Cameron. I live an hour and a half away from him, but he would always make the drive to come see me when I was younger, and still does to this day. If I ever need anything, he'll make sure I get it. He took me on trips all the time with just me and him, but still, I felt like an outsider. He would constantly put me second to Cameron. If we both had sports games on the same day, he would always go to Cameron's with his wife. Once, when I had an award ceremony, he couldn't come because Cameron was sick. It was just a cold, by the way. When I wanted him to teach me how to drive, he said he couldn't because he promised Cameron he would teach him first, but that he'd help me after Cameron got his license. I could list off a bunch of other examples. My dad would show up to my stuff, but if Cameron had something going on at the same time, he wouldn't come. Cameron and I aren't friends. We get along fine if we're together, but neither of us is going out of the way to talk to the other. I think he's spoiled and obviously our dad's favorite. Our dad and his mom did him no favors because his grades are bad and his life has no direction. He didn't apply to any colleges and he won't even get a part-time job. We're both graduating high school this year. His school district released their graduation schedule after mine, and of course our graduations are on the same day at the same time. We live an hour and a half apart, so obviously our dad can't make it to both. He's known my graduation date for weeks before Cameron learned his. We already had plans for him to come and spend the day here, but I knew as soon as I saw that schedule he was gonna flake. At first he said he wasn't sure what he was gonna do. He's been avoiding the topic for weeks, but our graduations are on the 29th, so he has to decide now. Well, yesterday he took me to dinner. He told me that he was going to go to Cameron's graduation. He said it was because Cameron's grandparents weren't going to be able to make it. and Cameron would only have his mom while I have my mom, stepdad, siblings, and grandparents all coming to mine. I'm not an idiot. It was just an excuse that I knew would be coming. He tried to soften the blow by promising me he'd make up for it by taking me on a graduation trip anywhere I wanted to go, even though he had already promised me that months ago. He's taking his wife and Cameron on a family trip to Hawaii in June. It's supposed to be Cameron's graduation trip, but he promised he and I would have our own trip. Now, all of a sudden, that trip is supposed to also be a makeup for missing my graduation. So I told him, okay, I want to go to this one weekend event that is on the same week he's going to Hawaii. He told me he can't, because that's when they're going to Hawaii. I didn't actually want to go to this event, I was just proving a point. I told him to postpone his Hawaii trip so he can take me to the event. He said he can't because everything is already paid for and non-refundable. I told him that he's missing my high school graduation. The least he can do is make me the priority when it comes to the graduation trips. He said I'd have to pick a different weekend. I told him he doesn't actually care about making it up to me. He's only okay with what I want so long as it doesn't interfere with his real family. He denied it and told me to try to understand the position he's in. I told him straight up that he always chooses Cameron over me. For once, I want to be the first choice. So I said I'll have a ticket ready for him, but that if he doesn't come, I'll know where I stand in his life. I don't care about a makeup trip. Either he shows up and we still have a relationship, or I'm just done with him. He told me that I was being unreasonable, and maybe I am, but I'm still standing my ground. I already know he's not going to come even after my ultimatum. So am I the jerk for throwing away our entire relationship over this? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot. OP's dad messed this up 19 years ago, and he is incapable of doing the things he has to do to make it work. Unfortunately, that takes the form of OP always getting less because dad is a weak person. This was an opportunity for dad to get his life together and realize that keeping the peace at home needed to take a back seat to keeping the relationship going with his son. The sad part is that OP has to be the adult here, while dad struggles in his parental failures. Comment 2, as someone who has regretted reconciling with my deadbeat dad, just go no contact North Carolina and make it permanent. After graduation, he will feel like there are no longer any real stakes involved and suddenly will want to reconcile and make it all up to you, since there will no longer be any direct competition with his favorite son. For me, my dad was only interested in getting back into my life when I no longer needed anything from him financially. I've regretted it ever since. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for reading. So, a lot has happened in the past 2 weeks since I last updated you. After my dad told me he was going to Cameron's graduation instead of mine, I was pretty upset. I decided to take a step back and not talk to him for a bit. I needed some time to cool off and think about what I wanted to do next. During this time, my mom noticed I was more withdrawn and asked me what was going on. I told her everything, and she was really supportive. She said she understood why I was hurt and that it was okay to feel that way. A few days later, my dad called me. He said he wanted to talk and asked if we could meet up. I agreed, but I was still pretty angry. When we met, he apologized again for missing my graduation and tried to explain his decision. He said he felt like he was stuck with a big decision and that he didn't want to hurt either of us. I told him that I understood his position, but it didn't change how I felt. I told him that I needed to feel like a priority in his life, not just an afterthought. Then he dropped a shocker on me. He told me that Cameron's mom had been diagnosed with a serious illness a few months ago, and that's why he felt like he needed to be there for Cameron. He said he didn't want to tell me because he didn't want to worry me, but he realized now that he should have been honest from the start. This news hit me hard. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and guilt. I was angry that he hadn't told me sooner, sad for Cameron and his mom, and guilty for being so harsh on my dad. I didn't know what to say at first. I just sat there trying to process everything. My dad looked at me with a pained expression, and I could tell he was struggling too. I finally told him that I appreciated his honesty, but it didn't change the fact that I felt like I was always second to Cameron. He said he understood and that he was going to try to do better. He promised that he would make more of an effort to be there for me, and that he wanted to rebuild our relationship. After our conversation, I felt a little better, but I was still unsure about what to do. I decided to talk to my mom and stepdad about it. They were both really supportive and gave me some good advice. They said that it was important to give my dad a chance to make things right, but that I also needed to set boundaries and make sure I was taking care of myself. In the meantime, I started to think about my relationship with Cameron. We had never been close, but I realized that maybe it was time to try to change that. I reached out to him and asked if he wanted to hang out. He seemed surprised, but agreed. We ended up spending a day together, just talking and getting to know each other better. It was a little awkward at first, but by the end of the day, I felt like we had made some progress. As the days went by, I started to feel more at peace with everything. I decided to give my dad another chance and see if he would follow through on his promises. I also continued to spend time with Cameron, and we started to build a tentative friendship. It wasn't easy, but I felt like it was worth the effort. Then, something unexpected happened. My dad called me one evening and told me that he had managed to change the dates for their Hawaii trip. He said he had talked to Cameron and his mom, and they all agreed that it was important for him to be at my graduation. I was shocked and didn't know what to say. I thanked him and told him that it meant a lot to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly a priority in his life. Graduation day came, and my dad was there, just like he promised. It was an emotional day, but I felt a sense of closure and relief. I knew that things weren't perfect, but I felt like we were finally on the right track. My dad and I still have a lot of work to do, but I'm hopeful that we can rebuild our relationship and move forward. As for Cameron, we're still working on our relationship too. It's not easy, but I feel like we're making progress. I've come to realize that he's not the enemy and that we're both just trying to navigate a difficult situation. I'm hopeful that we can continue to build our friendship and support each other through everything. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for snapping at the groom's mother and bride's aunt during a wedding and losing clients over it? 40 years old female, am a wedding photographer. When I book a wedding, I make it very clear to the bride, Amber, 19 years old, and groom Sam, 19 years old, that these rules apply with their permission. 1. No phones allowed in the ceremony. 2. If they want any photos to be kept private, please let me know. This is the couple's decision. 3. I will not hesitate to tell people to put their phones down or not to step in front of me, with the couple's permission. My most recent wedding happened this past Friday. I knew within the first 15 minutes of guests arriving, including the groom's mother, Susan, and the bride's aunt, Karen, for good reason, that this would be a long day. During the ceremony, as Amber was walking down the aisle, Susan decided she wanted to place herself so close to the aisleway that as I am trying to capture Sam's face, I did my best to work around her without actually placing myself in the aisle. Thankfully, as I have begun editing, I think I will be able to edit and possibly remove her from the photo. Thank God for Photoshop. This was only the beginning of her being in my way. The rest of the ceremony went beautifully. After the ceremony ended, everyone was asked to move to the reception hall so we could continue with taking photos. After all the basics, family, and wedding party photos, I asked everyone besides Amber and Sam to head out so we could get their solo and couple shots done. This session was one of the ones that they requested to stay private. I made sure the room was empty before we began. We started with a beautiful shot of Amanda propped on the piano and Sam standing beside her. As I was posing them, I saw Aunt Karen at the front door with her phone out recording. I sighed, took a deep breath, and turned to her. "Ma'am, I am sorry, but I need you to leave the room. These photos are for the bride and groom only, and per their request, they don't want anyone recording or taking photos besides me." She huffed a bit, rolled her eyes, put her phone away, and headed back to the reception. After this, we headed outside to get photos of them under the beautiful arches and large wooden French doors. As I began posing Amanda in front of the big doors, here comes Susan. "Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful," she said. "Thank you, but please go inside. This is a private session," I said politely. "I am just watching," she retorted. I tried to hold in my bitch-look face and smiled. "I understand, but this was a request by the bride and your son to keep things private," I said. "Please go inside, I can't begin until you go," I said. Again, the huffy sigh, and I swear a tiny foot stomp before she headed inside. You would think this is where it ends. It doesn't. Now we go to the part where I think I may be the jerk. During the father-daughter dance, here comes Aunt Karen with her phone to record the entire thing, over my shoulder. I don't care if guests take photos or videos of these moments, and neither did Amanda or Sam, but she was directly over my shoulder and occasionally stepping in front of me to get close up. I took a deep breath, tried to take the red I was seeing to a light pink before I turned to her. Ma'am, Amanda and Sam have paid me to do this job. I need you to stay out of my way, or I am going to have to ask you to go sit down. I cannot capture these moments if you are constantly in my way and interrupting, I said, probably with a bit of sass. I am family, she said. I get that, but this is my job and you're interfering. Now please step aside or go sit down. I snapped. Yes, snapped. Snapped so hard I am pretty sure she got word whiplash. So yes, I do my best to be professional, but I had enough. I worry I may have been too rude, and the way she and her entire table glared at me for the rest of the night, I worry I may not have handled this the right way. So, am I the jerk? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot for telling someone to stop interfering and follow the directions of the bride and groom. I wouldn't even say that you snapped. Punching her in the face or calling her a freaking witch would have been snapping. That would have been unprofessional. But you didn't do that. Comment 2. I used to do wedding photography for friends, and this sort of thing was one of the reasons I stopped doing it. Grown people act like children at weddings. I would be furious after each one for the same reasons. Not the idiot. Now for the update. Thanks for all the comments from my last post. So, 2 weeks have passed since that wedding, and things have taken quite a turn. After the wedding, I sent the edited photos to Amber and Sam, and they seemed really happy with them. They even left a nice review on my website, which was a relief. But then, things started to unravel. A few days after sending the photos, I got a call from Amber. She sounded upset and said that Susan and Aunt Karen were furious about how I treated them during the wedding. Apparently, Susan had been complaining to Sam about how I was rude and unprofessional. Amber said she tried to defend me, but Susan was adamant that I had ruined her experience of the wedding. I felt terrible, but I stood by my actions. I was just doing my job, right? But then, Amber dropped a bomb. She said that Susan had been so upset that she demanded to see all the photos, including the private ones. Amber and Sam had initially agreed to keep those photos private, but under pressure from Susan, they reluctantly agreed to show her. I was hesitant, but Amber insisted, so I sent over the private photos. A few days later, I got another call, this time from Sam. He was livid. He said that Susan had found a photo she didn't like, one where she thought she looked bad, and she was demanding that I remove it from the album. I tried to explain that the album was already finalized and that removing the photo would mess up the layout, but Sam was insistent. He said that if I didn't remove the photo, Susan would leave a terrible review and tell everyone she knew not to hire me. I felt cornered, so I reluctantly agreed to remove the photo, but it didn't end there. Susan started nitpicking every little detail in the photos. She complained about the lighting, the angles, and even the color of the flowers in some shots. It was clear she was just trying to find faults. I tried to stay professional, but it was getting harder and harder to deal with her constant complaints. Then, the real mistake happened. In my frustration, I accidentally sent an email meant for my friend to Amber. In the email, I vented about how difficult Susan and Aunt Karen had been, and how I was regretting ever taking the job. I realized my mistake almost immediately, but it was too late. Amber had already read the email. Amber called me, and she was furious. She said she couldn't believe I would talk about her family that way and that she felt betrayed. I tried to apologize, but she wouldn't hear it. She said she was going to tell Sam, and they would decide what to do next. A few days later, I got a call from Sam. He said that they had decided to ask for a full refund and that they would be leaving a negative review. I tried to explain that I had already spent hours editing the photos and that a full refund wasn't fair, but Sam was adamant. He said that if I didn't give them a refund, they would take legal action. Feeling defeated, I agreed to give them a partial refund, but the damage was already done. They left a scathing review on my website and on several wedding forums. My business took a hit and I started losing clients. It was a nightmare. In the midst of all this, I started reflecting on how things had gotten so out of hand. I remembered a conversation I had with Amber during our initial meeting. She had mentioned that Susan was very controlling and that she was worried about how she would behave at the wedding. Amber had confided in me that she and Sam had almost eloped to avoid dealing with Susan's antics. I realized that Susan's behavior at the wedding was just a symptom of a much larger issue. I also thought about Aunt Karen. During the wedding, she had mentioned that she had recently gone through a tough divorce and that she was trying to find joy in family events. I felt a pang of guilt for snapping at her during the father-daughter dance. Maybe she was just trying to capture a happy moment in her life. But before I get into that, I need to mention something else. A week after the wedding, I got a call from another bride who had booked me for her wedding. She said she had heard about the incident with Susan and Aunt Karen and was having second thoughts about hiring me. She wanted to know if I could guarantee that there wouldn't be any issues at her wedding. I tried to reassure her, but she ended up canceling the booking. It was a huge blow to my confidence and my business. Looking back, I realized that I should have handled things differently. Maybe I should have been more patient with Susan and Aunt Karen. Maybe I should have found a way to keep the peace without compromising my work. But it's too late for regrets now. All I can do is learn from this experience and try to move forward. Thanks for reading. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day. Have a great